Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal podcast. Our guest today is Shayna Davis. Shayna is the CEO and founder at Executive Signals Group. Shayna, thanks for taking the time to chat.
I'm glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
My pleasure. We're going to get into the topic in a second, but before we did that, do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself and your business to our audience?
Absolutely. So, I am the founder of Executive Signals Group. You said that. And tech companies typically hire me when their leadership team is becoming increasingly visible to the outside world. And I help prepare them to make sure that they can represent their companies with trust and credibility.
Thank you. A lot of us definitely need that help. Like I quickly mentioned to you before we got started, I had a conversation with somebody on topics kind of related to what we're going to talk about today. So I feel like I should be, I don't know if I am, but I should be a little better prepared given what I've learned from that conversation. So I'm just going to pick up from where I left off with my guest that related to this topic, and then
Okay.
we'll go from there. The topic to loosely, sort of socialize with the audience is you had mentioned a competency gap that tech leaders have, between what they actually do or what they're good at and what other things that they need to do. As
Yeah.
somebody who's running a company, a startup, I couldn't appreciate that more because I know it's true, right? I would have not understood the depth of that statement, uh, 5 years ago, but I think I actually do right now. So that's one thing we want to talk about, and also generally talk about external communication. You kind of mentioned when we spoke before the recording as to why a strong product and the right team may not just maybe you need that for sure, but may not be good enough to find the success that you're looking for, right? So that's kind of the breadth of what we want to talk about. We'll take some examples. I'll play the devil's advocate where I have to, or even if I don't have to, I'd like to do that just to get to hear both sides of that story. So
I love it.
thank you. So without further ado, let's get into the first part of what you mentioned, competency gap that tech leaders have. What are some things that you're seeing that you used to see in the past, what you're seeing recently, and just get us started there?
Well, I always love to phrase it that way because y'all are so smart that you usually don't think you have any competency gaps at all. So it's usually like, wait a minute, what? We have a gap somewhere? And I think that's part of it is recognizing that you're not expected to be brilliant in every area. But the reason why I call it a competency gap is because oftentimes, if you are a technical leader, especially if you're not the founder, and sometimes it can be if you are the founder, your role is typically not public facing, right? And so I think about a lot of the companies that I'm in communication with and I work with, and the CTO, the head of engineering, the head of product, they're usually building and scaling the team or the thing, and they're leading their teams, but very seldom, unless it's part of the hiring process, did it used to be part of the role that they had to engage outside of the company. And that's just not where we are now. It's very common nowadays that the entire core leadership team is having to represent the company externally, whether that is in a conversation with an investor, whether that's in a conversation with a potential employee or a potential customer, or you might be on an industry panel or being interviewed by the media, especially as you continue to get into high growth. You start to get into series B, you start to get into scaling, your leadership team is going to have to engage outside of the four walls of the company. That's not necessarily something that you've had to be intentional about in previous years, and it's not always something that you're comfortable with either. So I call it a competency gap because it's now becoming a requirement or kind of like part of the job, but not necessarily always your jam or what it is that you're best at, respectfully.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Why do you think that need has changed? Like, what was different, like, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe longer, that you see
Yeah.
that the need for them to engage with an external audience wasn't either there to begin with, or wasn't there to the extent that you think you believe we do have right now?
I think a couple of the things, I think that there are three signals that every company is receiving right now, regardless of your industry, regardless of your size. Every company is in a talent war. Every company is experiencing a trust gap, which is one of the bigger ones. And every company is obviously being disrupted by technology. And if you rewind even 3 years ago, 5 years ago, there wasn't a new bright, shiny object that was coming on the market that might be similar to yours or competing with yours. I used to say every 3 weeks. Now it's like every 3 hours,
Right.
something new is coming on the scene. But the trust is a big one. Nowadays, the reason why I say strong product and right team is not enough is because perception and reputation is being built outside of the company, regardless of how great your team or your product is. And so when you look at the fact that the landscape that we're in right now is a lot more competitive because of how quickly technology is coming on the screen, on the scene, and skepticism is just at an all-time high. Like at the time of this recording, because I know podcasts like live forever, like it's spring of 2026 at the time of this recording, and skepticism is at an all time high. People don't trust the government. They don't trust technology. They don't trust companies. They think everybody is like out for bad, which obviously I'm being a little bit facetious. But the point is that product strength alone and strength of the team alone is not enough to have an advantage when everybody is fighting over the same talent, over the same market share for technology, and skepticism is just at an all-time high. And I do believe that in the future years, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, no, I wish I could disagree. I cannot. I don't even want to play the devil's advocate here because we're living through some of the pain ourselves as a company, right? And I've said
Yeah.
this more than once in our podcast before, but I'll say it for your benefit or for other people who may not have watched some of the other podcasts of ours. When we built our first product, Shayna, we're still a bunch of engineers. We backed ourselves in being able to build it. We did worry about running into technical issues, but we're like, you know what? We'll figure those things out.
Yeah.
As it turned out, sure, we do run into those issues all the time. Technology does change a lot more frequently these days, but it never was stagnant to begin with.
Mhm.
But that's not where we are overwhelmed as a company, as a business, because we still can back ourselves into picking up tools and technologies that we may and may not have actually worked with in the past, right? That's a skill that we believe we do bring to the table. But everything else that was around the building of the software, I didn't appreciate that enough, not because I didn't want to, because I was ignorant of it. And I
Wow.
do know a lot of developers and architects I work with who sometimes, we wrongly believe unintentionally that what we are doing is actually, for whatever reason, more difficult or more important than something else. I can say, as somebody who's been in the business of building software for like 25 years, that everything else other than coding, even with or without Claude and all of the tools that assist you in coding these days. I'm just talking, even if those tools were not to exist, a lot of us, I want to believe, I think it's the truth from a developer's heart, which is that is much easier than
Yeah.
everything else you need to have the company be successful. Sales
Yeah.
is one of it, marketing, and we're talking more about communications here. Now, given those gaps, let's say I agree that it's a good product and a great team is only starting point. You need to do a lot more than that. Can you walk us through a couple of examples? Could be
Hmm.
one, real ones or manufactured ones, almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But an example of a case where things are hunky dory, how that happened. When was the engagement with the external media communications? Was it after the product came into being or when the idea was in the mind versus people doing things wrong, even repetitively, that you've seen, even though they think it's correct? And what are some examples that you can think of that you
Yeah.
could possibly share with us?
Well, I want to start by saying that oftentimes we don't even think that this is a priority until we're launched and in the market. We think that that's the only time that we really have to even worry about public perception, etc. And while you may not be in the public eye as often when you're just getting started, I think that's a better time to prepare for when you are going to be. But I want to share with you a couple of examples. One, I was at a oh gosh, it was, I guess it was, I don't know, I'm going to call it a conference for lack of a better word, but it really wasn't a conference. It was a growth summit that was happening in a particular city. I'm going to try to be as vague as possible so that
Sure.
no one gets their feelings hurt or feel like I'm bashing them. And throughout the course of this day, there was a fintech panel, there was a biotech panel, and there was an investor panel. And on the fintech panel and on the biotech panel, there was a myriad of questions that were being asked about like where the industry is, where it's going. You can probably guess the landscape of the conversation. And out of the course of the day, I'm going to say that there was probably about 24 people through the course of these various panels. And there was only one person, Krish, out of those 24 people that every answer they gave, they didn't go back to one of the features of their product or what it is that they were doing at their company. And he's the only person that I really remember anything that he said. He's quite frankly the only person that I wasn't giving a little bit of the side eye, because I believe that, especially someone like yourself, that you have people that are building a product and you're building it for a reason and to probably solve a problem that is important to you, that you have some unique perspectives about why you're building what you're building. You have some unique perspectives about the industry you're in and where the industry is headed. But why is it, and this is not a question I'm expecting you to answer, but why is it that in our response to questions or in conversations with any audience that you could be in front of, from a customer all the way up to someone sitting in the audience, you mean to tell me that the only thing that you can do is repeat what I could probably find on your website? The only responses you can give are those 3 or 4 bullet points that I'm almost pretty sure that the comms department or the PR department told you to memorize. Again, if we're going back to, is this a company that I want to come work for? Is this a company that I really feel like I can get behind? Do I want to invest in this company? I need to hear more than, well, that's why it was important to us to have a button that you could push and didn't have to push hard. That's why over here, what we're building. And I think that's one of the biggest misses that I see, is that leaders are not taking the time to be intentional about who they are as the leader first and exactly what it is that they believe. They're creating no narrative around themselves or the company or why it is that they're building. So then they become forgettable, and trust can often even erode instead of actually being built, because I'm like, I just don't know how much I can get behind the leadership of a company that the only thing they can talk about is the features and benefits of their product or what school they went through, because all of those things nowadays are table stakes. Everybody's product is good. Everybody's, got a great team. I say everybody, but what else do you have that can actually build credibility and trust outside of the product? Because that's what it is that people want to hear. The investors even said, I have everything that someone asked me to invest in is a good product and is a good idea. I'm usually betting on the team that's behind it, because 6 months from now, the product's probably not going to look the same as it does now or what you're predicting it's going to look like anyway. And so I think that we really just have to start to be a little bit more intentional about our leadership identity, as I call it.
Okay, so that's very interesting what you say there. I'm going to try and dig a little bit deeper for me to get more clarity, right, than
Yeah.
what you already said. So let's say here is this person. I'm going to put myself in their shoes.
Yeah.
I've been asked a few questions either in this conference or a summit. And then what you had mentioned as what was lacking was what they actually did end up sharing were items that you could probably easily find on their product page or
Right.
marketing site or something along those lines. What, without a specific example, or even you could take us as an example, Shana, it doesn't matter, would you have rather had them share with you or the audience there? Like, again, we can even create or manufacture these examples just so people have an exact understanding. So it could be Snowpal as a company, or it could be a restaurant that's selling food. I usually go with something that's unrelated to software sometimes, just so it's a little bit more understandable to everybody, but does not matter. But if you could just tell us specifically what were the things you might have wanted to hear about the
Yeah.
team or the company that you didn't see on their site?
I want to hear, where do you feel the industry is and where is it going? And what are some of the things that if we don't get it right, we're really going to miss the boat? I want to hear, what are the things that other companies are not willing to name publicly? And one of the quick and easy tests that you can take yourself through as well is just ask yourself, if I What is my, I'm going to ask it in the form of a question. I would want people to be able to answer, what is my unique point of view about either the industry that I'm in or the field that I'm in 30 seconds or less, without mentioning my company name or without mentioning the product that it is that we're building? Because I know that you actually have a perspective. It usually just is not, it's not being shared. But a specific example of the one guy who I think got it right, he gave some examples of analogies of when they were in war when he was in the Navy. And he talked about, he used some terminology that I don't quite remember because it's been about a month. But he even shared like strategically what they were thinking about when they were trying to enter the territory of the opposing group of people or whatever. And he said, and that's exactly what it is that we have to think about if we're in the technology space. We need to be thinking about getting this right. We need to be thinking about making sure that we avoid that. And then he could come back and say, and that's why what it is that we're building at Snowpal is really so important, because we want to make sure that this is something that is actually going to, I'm going to completely make this up, is actually going to democratize people actually having access to things that they can invest in instead of it just being, reserved for the wealthy. So now I'm thinking to myself, oh, wow, like, this is a guy that, and especially if there's other people on his team that are able to convey ideas in this same way, I'm thinking, oh, wow, like, this is a company I want to follow. This is a company I want to go work for. This is a company I actually want to lean into and learn more about the product, because I actually heard something that was like seasoning and you just weren't up there sounding like a robot repeating bullet points.
You've said something very interesting and things that I've actually had some conversations with either myself or with other people. So let me ask you, based on what you said and based on what I had asked earlier as well. Here are some initial questions. So I'll talk about content creation for a second, right? A little bit different from literally what you were explaining there, but I can somehow draw a parallel there. When we create content, or let's say even the podcast, right? We do this for n number of reasons. We started this for a particular reason. Ended up being changed its format and whatnot. But long story short, we have a solo podcast where we share our technical learnings, and we do
Hmm.
a collaborative podcast where we speak with distinguished guests such as yourself to pick their brains and learn more from those guests as well. Now, during the process of this happening, I can tell you that there are times in the videos here when people will talk about a problem that we are actually solving. And I would never remember to mention that, yep, actually, Snowpal's in the business of doing it. And my wife would be like, Krish, should you have not made that mention? That seemed like a good opening there. Why would you not say it? I'm like, no, it's like, we were just talking about this in generality. And I want to just keep that just not so specific. And she goes, no, you want to pitch where you get this opportunity. So between the two of us, Shayna, my wife, and I don't know. We have this conversation all the time. And the reason I'm going to ask this question is based on what you told me earlier, it sounds to me like you're trying to establish credibility of that person or the team based on what they share with the audience that's outside of what they do in their company, not related to their product. Which means, is it more like an impression that they have to make on the audience, which could be entirely unrelated to their core business? Or are you looking for them to establish authority on items that are in the space of their core business but not related to their product offering?
I think that it's both. It's definitely about authority and credibility because you do want people to buy what it is that you're selling. But to your wife's point, I'm not recommending that you never mention the company and what it is that they're building and the features. I'm just saying that in a world where stakes are high and skepticism is at an all-time high, trust is at an all-time low, that it needs to be a blend of the two, because this is not an anti-PR rant, it's not an anti, I think all of them are important, but we find people that do all of one and none of the other. And usually sometimes it's so heavily on the features and benefits that I'm like, I don't even, there was nothing that was memorable. And now I'm like, I don't even know if I trust you so much. And so to your wife's point and my point, it's like, take a little bit of what it is that you believe, like it could be something as simple as, what, there's an industry myth that I quietly disagree with because everybody is on the rave of, I'm just going to make this up, like, we should be using AI tools to be more productive. And I actually disagree with that because I believe, and then you insert what it is that you believe. And then you can quickly, and at Snowpal, here's how we utilize tools so that we're productive, but we're not losing human strategy or whatever it is that you've said that you believe. So you have to have a blend of both because I think all of one and none of the other is a mistake as well. And so it's kind of finding that dance and that balance between here's who I am as the leader and what it is that I believe. And that's probably also why I'm building what I'm building and building it in the way that we've chosen to build.
Let me take a couple of examples, right? I think what you say there, I'm going to go with, again, this is just my opinion of what I read and what I watch. So it's not empirical data. But if you take, say, the Salesforce CEO, Mark Benioff, right? I've heard, watched a couple of videos, a few videos, more than a few, read some articles, and without knowing a whole lot about his background necessarily, uh, I get the feeling when I hear him talk, like he's one of those, at least as an engineer, as a developer, what I hear when I hear him talk is more sales than engineering as a CEO, right? It's just the way I read what he says. It's
Mhm.
almost like I always felt every time I've heard him say something, just personally speaking, that he's overselling what they are generally doing. Be it Agent Force, which has been, I think, one of the recent AI products for the last 12 to 18 months or so. I just take him as a random example because I want to take other CEOs, for instance, who could be founding CEOs or people who are hired into the company and running these large organizations. Because we go to these we go to these conferences in DC, Shayna, all the time, and I've seen a lot of these Fortune 500 CEOs and leaders talk sitting like 5 foot in front of me. So I've kind of enjoyed that experience, and I've seen sort of the personalities come across when you actually are live watching those people, something that may not come across necessarily as easily on video. So I
Mhm.
exactly know what you mean because when I hear someone, I don't know all of the companies, right? Because they may not be in the business of software, they could be in medicine, but I'm generally like all ears for the 3 to 6 minutes that they're talking because they are able to captivate the audience. You are interested in what that person is saying, and then you remember to go look them up and see what they might actually do. Now, like you literally said there, they may or may not have said anything about the product, and even if they did, I, as the audience, did not know because I don't know the company necessarily, but it retained, right? I remember that essentially, and that makes a difference. But that's something that is personality driven. I have to believe. I mean, a lot of us can work on things that are outside the realm of our personalities, but you can only go so far that's beyond, and then you're going to come back to your comfort zones and you keep forgetting. How do you recommend that? I mean, is there a difference between how you recommend founding CEOs or engineering or technical founders who build companies or run those companies? How between them and other people who are business CEOs who are very good at what they do, but they're not necessarily software engineers who started these companies. Between each of them, how do you, as somebody sitting in that audience, like you mentioned, what are you looking to hear? And is it different between these two speakers, or you couldn't care less between their backgrounds, but you want to hear the same sort of things? What are you looking to take away to have a good impression or the best impression of that company in your time that you spend there?
Well, I first want to say in the example that you gave about Mark is that oftentimes I think when people get in certain roles, they overcompensate for what it is that they think is the task at hand. And it's like, dude, it really wasn't that serious. Like why you're like, okay, we get it. Salesforce, we'll buy it. We'll enroll our team in it or whatever. And so I think some people just probably need a little bit of training and development. But I think sometimes there's certain pressures, oftentimes we impose them on ourselves, that we're actually overcompensating in some type of way in order to achieve a goal that either someone has told us is the goal or a goal that's really not even there, and so we're overcompensating. But what I'm looking for is not for someone to, because you mentioned like a lot of this is personality driven. And I'm glad that you said that because one of the first things that I tell teams that I work with is that I'm not trying to change who you are, but I am asking you to be more intentional about who you are, because it's not just about visibility, it's about voice, right? And so for me, what I'm looking for is someone that is actually being intentional about who it is that they are, because that is the only thing oftentimes that can differentiate yourself in a crowded marketplace. When a lot of, you just take just something as simple as a productivity tool. I was introduced to a productivity tool yesterday that basically allows me to dictate and not type. I literally have not typed a word since yesterday. It's the most phenomenal thing ever. But obviously, since I looked that up, I'm now getting the sponsored ads of every other productivity tool out there that essentially is a dictation tool. So just imagine if I was in a, I don't know if this would ever occur, but if I was at a conference where everyone on the panel represented one of these five or six companies that I have stumbled upon just within the last 12 to 18 hours, that is essentially a dictation tool. How are you going to maintain the attention of someone who's in the audience? Or how are you going to try to gain their piece of the market share? Or how are you going to convince them that maybe they should come work at your organization over one of your other competitors that is on there, when everybody's features are almost
Right.
exactly the same? And so what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for someone that is actually being intentional about who they are and what it is that they stand for. Now, obviously, you have a job to do, so I don't ever expect you not to mention, something about the company that you're with, or the product that it is that you're selling. But this is not about being performative. It's not about being fake. It's not about trying to act like something that you aren't, but it is 100% about you being intentional about who the hell you are.
You said, I was just making notes there while you're talking because I want to share a couple of examples as well. A lot of what you say there, Sheena, correct me if I'm wrong, comes down to the ability to sell. Right now, you may not be a salesperson.
You're selling
Maybe you
something, even if you're selling yourself.
Yeah, because that's, I think, that's I think it's not stressed enough because, say I grew up learning engineering, I grew up doing building software till I started the company. We understand what sales is. By understand, I mean, the definition of sales. Sometimes you can tell the definitions, the difference between sales, marketing, communications, and advertising and whatnot. But we never had the need to digest that, the depth, the gravity of those differences, because, well, it's not your problem. You're a developer, you're an architect. But the
Mm.
moment you start running a company, right, you become a founder, it becomes very, very important, right? You recognize the importance of sales, and then it takes a long time. It's not something, you could learn programming languages in fairly quicker time, I should say, than sales, because some of sales is mostly art and science, right? When you combine art and subjectivity, it's not something you can open a book and read those pages and chapters and suddenly become a great sales engineer, right? You need to have organically build those skills into you, and that takes a fair bit of time. Now, I want to take another example as well, which a little bit different from our core engineering conversation, but I think I want to still get your thoughts on it. So, Chipotle, right? The food chain,
Chipotle,
from
yeah.
when they, yeah, Chipotle, when they had the food poisoning issue. I'm thinking maybe it was like 10 years ago, give or take, something around that time frame. It feels like almost a decade ago. They had a CEO at the time, right? I don't know if he was the founder of the company or not, but they had more than one food poisoning, the E. coli outbreak issues, and finally they let that CEO go, and then they replaced. You know, I'm thinking they replaced. I'm trying to think. Maybe they replaced that with him, with Brian Nickel, if I remember correctly, who's the current CEO of Starbucks. I mean,
Okay.
I could be wrong here, but that's my recollection. So they replaced, and Brian Nichols, I believe, is somebody who worked at other food companies in the past, maybe, and which ones those were. But then they hired Brian, and he was known to be very good at what he did. Suddenly, you never heard about the food poisoning or all of the E. coli outbreaks. And that was, I mean, there was no conversation about it. Now, as somebody who used to eat there a fair bit and who stopped eating during the time they had those outbreaks, I was like, wow, either they did something dramatically different to fix the problem, or they just decided to have a different way to communicate to their audience, to their customers. And for somebody who does not understand the food business, I decided I would err on the side of the latter, believing that that's what transpired. Because if the previous CEOs there who had run it for a while couldn't get those figured out, somebody who's coming in new from the outside, what's the likelihood that they got to the bottom of the core food problem? I don't know. They could have, but that
Yeah.
was my takeaway from there. I share that as an example just to get your thoughts. I mean, could that be, if that, oh, what I'm saying is not fiction and it's actually true? Would that be an example of changed communication that actually helps the cause of the company?
I think that it is a situation where a company doesn't wait until something becomes crisis management. We had talked about the individual being intentional about who they are. Mike Tyson has a quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I often say to tech founders, why can't you just create a plan to keep you from getting punched in the face? Or instead of waiting until you get punched in the face to create a plan. When you have companies that lead and engage externally in the way that I've been recommending, when something comes up like something that would typically be a PR nightmare, oftentimes people are not as willing to jump ship because of the level of trust and credibility and authority that has been built by the CEO and by the core leadership team before the snafu happened. But if your leaders are invisible, or they're not building in this type of credibility when they are visible, when a PR nightmare occurs, that's what it ends up being, is a PR nightmare that's a little bit more difficult to bounce back from. Whether when it's like, oh wow, like based on the stories that have been shared and based on the level of trust and credibility I have, now I maybe just chalk it up to like, well, stuff just kind of happens. You know what I mean? Like maybe somebody didn't wash their hands, but I'm not gonna blackball the place or, expose them to cancel culture, boycott and never go again, because the leadership team has demonstrated themselves as a team that I actually believe in and want to get behind. I mean, it's kind of like us as parents. Our children can make a mistake, but because we love them and because we want to see the good in them, we're not willing to just to throw them away. And I think that that's some of the things that is actually a missed opportunity for companies that either believe that their leaders can be invisible or think that the only thing that people care about is what's on the menu. You have something like E. coli breakout, and you want people to be like, well, at least this is a leadership team that I believe in and that I trust. And I'll maybe just not eat there for the next 30 days while they get while they get
Right.
their affairs in order so that I don't end up sick. But then after that, I'm probably gonna go back because I now believe in this company.
Okay, fair enough. As much as I run a startup, a product company, a lot of my examples and questions here are intentionally around large companies, at least in the context of this particular conversation, Shayna, because I think when you talk communications, it becomes more and more important as the size of of your company grows, essentially, right? Otherwise, if it's more engineering oriented, I would take examples of what we particularly do at Snowpal, which is why I'm going and not picking on these CEOs or founders, but just picking them as examples. Now let me go to the next thing I want to ask you, which is, so let's say there is a sense of reputation that that leader needs to bring to the table. Now, depending on the business, depending on the geographical location, the sector, a lot of that is bound to vary. But enough said that you've clarified how you expect some of those communications to actually look like. Now, here's my follow up question. Should the company come before this founder, or should it be vice versa? And I'm going to take again two examples very specifically here of remarkably accomplished people just to make it easier for ease of conversation. For somebody, anyone who's watching, I'd say you take this, remove these big names, but that problem domain might still be applicable to people of all sizes, forms, shapes, and the same for companies as well. So, the two examples I'm going to go with, say Elon Musk.
Mhm.
No, but he doesn't need an introduction when you're worth $800 billion. Surely not. But like if you took Elon Musk, and I think his next company is going to go IPO sometimes this week, I'm hearing, you think of the person well before the company, right? I don't know. I don't know if it's just me, but generally, before you think SpaceX, before you think X, before you think XAI, before you think Tesla, you are most likely thinking Elon Musk. Now let me go to the other end of that spectrum. I think Tesla's probably market cap is give or take what $1.5 trillion, something like that. I'm going to take another company that's along the same lines, Broadcom, right? So Broadcom's run by Hawk Tan, another incredibly talented. I want to say he's probably the founder CEO, if not someone's been with the company forever. Incredibly amazing leader. But if I went to the street just outside my house and asked people to say 7 things about Elon Musk, they might have like 17 to say. Depending on who you ask, it might be on that side of the spectrum, but regardless, they're going to have enough to say. But if
Mhm.
I just said Hawktan or Broadcom, as important as the company is in what they're doing from an AI standpoint, people may recognize the company most likely before the CEO. Each one brings a certain set of nuances to the table. I
Yeah.
just have a few questions around this, but before I ask my questions, I want to get your thoughts on what do you see the differences here? Do you see what are your initial thoughts on that part of what I've shared with you?
My initial thoughts is every company has their own captive audience. Everyone knows Tesla. Everyone doesn't know the other company that you named, but there is a subset of people that know them and will get to know them. And in my opinion, I believe that if we focus on how much do we prioritize what it is that you and I are talking about based on the market share that we may gain or the household recognition that we have, that we're missing the point. Because for me, the point is that in the new world demands something different in order for us to win, whether that is an audience of 10 or whether it's an audience of 10 million. So, regardless of the size or name recognition of the company, you're going to need customers, you're going to need talent that is going to work there. And oftentimes, especially if you're a smaller company, you're going to need some funding to back you. Right. And so, regardless if it's an audience of 10 or it's an audience of 10 million, we have to be concerned with the level of influence that we exhibit outside of the four walls. Because even as a small company, oftentimes that perception and that reputation is being built ahead of you. It may even be somebody went and took a look at your LinkedIn profile and you think that because you're a small company that it was okay for your headshot to look like it was taken in a backyard barbecue and or then there's nothing in the about section, like, so the narrative and the perception is being created for your subset of the world that is important to you, regardless of the size of your company. And it's never too soon to start to look at how well you're engaging influence and influencing externally. So I would just say that as the foundation for the next set of questions that I think is coming about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The next set of questions are going to be a little bit more. We have about 20 minutes to go, so I'm going to become a little more selfish and
Okay.
self centered, if you will. So we're
Yeah.
going to shift gears from really powerful people, rich people, and big companies to not so rich people and unimportant people like Krish, because there are a lot of us around as well. Right. So my next set of questions are geared towards much smaller companies.
Okay.
Now, so complete mind shift here, Shayna, if you will. Communication, as you said, right? I'm just picking up on one of the last things you said, which is no matter what size the company is. And I was going to ask you this before you said that, but since you said that, it made it even easier for me to ask these questions. Communications is still important because no matter how big or small you are, you need customers to be able to survive, to be able to be successful, to be able to sell products to. What customers, what kind of customers they are, B2B, B2C, which part of the country, is it is it geocentric, location specific, and whatnot? Those are second set of problems. But needless to mention, we need those people. They need to be able to build, they need to be willing to pay for the products. It's one thing to use it for free because software is available without being paid for in plenty, and people have started to feel entitled about it, which is the sad side of the software use cases, right? Google gives a lot of it free to the end user. They make a ton of money by charging a lot more on a B2B scale, but for B2C, it's pretty much free, right? And people are starting to expect everything to be free. Nobody wants to pay for any of the stuff, and it's not going to change anymore. So, with that as context, Small companies, we have smaller teams. We have 15 things to do and two people to do those 15 things. So we try to keep our focus on things that we deem are important. Does not mean that they are more important than what we don't do, but we try to keep our focus on building the software because we feel like someone's going to break through the front door, steal our products because they are amazingly cool and hot. But I know that that's far fetched from reality. How do you recommend smaller companies, startups, with some funding, with no funding, bootstrap, but with products that are functional regardless, how should they engage in the business of communication? And if the question's not hard enough already, I'm just going to throw one more into the mix here. You've got to assume that a lot of these founders, particularly if they're engineering founders, they may have engineering skills, but they don't have much by way of other skills. And I say that including myself, right? So we are not built to be able to take this product and pitch to somebody in 2 minutes, 30 seconds, all those elevator pitches and all those cool stuff sometimes comes across as noise to us because we feel like that's taking away from the reality of the product that we are selling is. Given these challenges, given our limitations as small companies and startup founders, what are some silver bullets that you can give us, Shayna, that'll help us be magically successful?
Absolutely. So I first want to say that it is important because obviously we wouldn't have been talking about it for almost an hour and you wouldn't be saying like, "Hey, how do the small companies do this?" But I'm not asking you to live and breathe this stuff, we're talking about it in the scrums every morning and it's taking up 30 of the 60 minutes of the all hands that we do once a month. But I would say, can you say that whether we're a team of three or whatever the size of the team is, can we once a month put 30 minutes on the calendar where we get together either around the boardroom table or we get together on Zoom if you have a virtual team, and let's actually spend some time thinking about things like our LinkedIn profile? Can we actually spend time seeing if one of our teammates need help with the challenge that I gave at the beginning of the show is answering the question, what is your point of view about the industry that you're in and where it's going? If they can't answer that in 30 seconds or less without mentioning the company name or the specific product, help each other with that. And the reason why I say help each other with that is because you may not be aware of the things that you're so passionate about and that you mention all the time, and the things that aggravate you and that you complain about, but I guarantee you your team members that you spend time with notice those things that are your unique POV. And so just pick one day a month and say for 30 minutes we're going to think about how we would talk about our unique point of view, because there's going to come a time where we're going to be in conversation with customers or investors or the media or on an industry panel. Can we spend 30 minutes this month looking at our LinkedIn profile? And these are the three things that I want you to do when you look at your profile. Number one, make sure that your picture does not look like it was taken in a backyard barbecue and I can still see the shoulder of the other person that was next to
Right.
you that you just cropped out. Now, that can mean you keep on your Hollister t-shirt and you go stand against the white wall and somebody that's with you takes a picture of you of your iPhone, but it's at least just you from the head up and it makes you look like the type of person that you really are. In your headline section, don't just put software developer, like, so what? Number three, and more importantly, in my opinion, your about section is the place to have a paragraph form of your CV that is really going to be in the experience section after there. Yet I bet you 90% of LinkedIn profiles that are out there, that's what they do. In the CV, in the experience section, it's going to tell what company you worked at, how long you were there, what you did. Why are we using the about section as just a paragraph description of what is in the experience part below there? What you can do though is use that section to layer in some of the things that we have been talking about. Like I said earlier, what's an industry myth that you quietly disagree with? What decisions have you made that best reflect how you think differently? Right? Because then the next paragraph of that can get to, and that's why at so and so company we're building this type of software, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have to try to overhaul it overnight. It doesn't have to become a major thing, but it needs to be a priority that you're at least looking at it sometime within the next 30 days for 30 minutes. If you can just make this little old girl happy to say, my team is going to sit down sometime within the next 30 days for 30 minutes, and we're going to think about what our unique point of view is, and we're going to make sure that that's reflected in our LinkedIn. If you do nothing but that, and then every single month you guys sit around and have conversations about, what if an investor was to come in here right now? What stories could we tell, and what are the different things that we could talk about outside of the product that would make them want to give us money? If the media was lined up outside of the door, what are some of the things that we could share outside of what it is that we're building that would shape the right narrative? So that's just some of the easy things that everybody can do. And if you're listening to this right now and you're like, I work for a Fortune 100 company, that's still where I would recommend you start.
Thank you for those very specific recommendations. Appreciate that. We have like, what is it, like 15, 13 minutes to go. So I want to go through a couple of quick things and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask me anything that you might want to ask me, Shayna. A couple of things I want to ask you. The last two or three questions is role boundaries are disappearing in a lot of the companies, not just small ones, even larger ones. You don't have a distinct separation between a developer, a product manager, or a tester. Things are becoming grayer given AI and the impact of AI, right? So one of the questions kind of relates to that. The other question, before I want to ask that one is, well, I want to talk about content creation really quickly. In the context of our conversation thus far, how important is content creation? And then say content does need to get created, what kind of content do you recommend that it gets created, that should get created? And the last part of the question is, what are some of the distribution platforms that you actually see work for that content?
Okay, so I first want to say I was in a wreck 3 weeks ago and I have a concussion, so I'm going to do the best I can to remember all three of those questions
Oh, no
that
worries,
you
I'll repeat them. My bad, I can repeat. The first one is, what is
is
content important? Yeah.
what type of content. Yes, content is important because there needs to be some level of fingerprint that is out there that people can find because they're going to go look you up, right? They're going to look at your website, they're going to look at, your social media. Their content is important. I don't think that you will be surprised that part of my answer of what type of content is important is that at least if you post multiple times a week, I need at least one of those posts to be what? About your unique point of view and the narrative of who you are as as the leader in the company and why you're building the thing that you're building. But I also think that I'm not seeing enough content nowadays, and I think it's a missed opportunity about why it's important now. And a lot of people, God, I don't want to get in trouble. A lot of people don't care about anything that does not personally affect them, right?
Okay.
Like I'll just say that. And so founders get mad when I say nobody cares about what you're doing, but nobody cares about what you're doing until you should show them why they specifically should care. So I think when I think about content, I want to see who you guys are as individuals, but I also want you to show me why this matters now, because that's sometimes one of the few differentiators that I have if I'm comparing you to someone else. But I think if we don't prioritize content, now I actually like the fact that LinkedIn doesn't want you posting multiple times a day. I think it actually limits your reach if you're posting too much because it wants to maintain the integrity of what the platform was intended for, and they don't want it to just become a commercialized, social channel. So I actually like that about LinkedIn. But also at the same time, if there's not something out there when someone looks you up and you've never posted, well, then that goes back to you're helping just to erode trust. If there's no content out there at all, especially in this day and age, they're wondering, like, "Ooh, well, I don't even know whether or not I should, again, back to trust. I don't even know whether or not I should trust what it is that they're building because it's 2026 and I haven't even seen a post about anything since 2021."
Absolutely. So the
And
qu-
then
the
I don't
qu-
remember the other questions, Chris.
no worries. The thank you for answering that. Also, the type of content.
Mhm.
This is not Netflix, right? So you're not looking for entertainment, but at the same time, I've sometimes seen videos that are, I mean, they might say remarkable things in unremarkably boring manners that you don't ever want to find a way to sit through those 15, 20 minutes. And there are other times when I see somebody take a camera and go eat something for like 90 minutes, and I'm like hooked onto that piece of content. Now, it's very subjective. There's a lot of content, like hundreds of thousands and millions of hours of content. But when you're looking for professional content, Shayna, are you looking for content that's specific to what it's trying to answer or speak to? Or would you be willing to watch it or hear it if it was more funny and made your day lighter and that's just touched a little bit about the core topics of of the problem?
I think it depends on the platform. What the research has shown is that any of the meta platforms or TikTok, people are there because they want to be entertained. And so even if you are on there with a product demo or a reel that is about your product, if you're not entertaining, you won't be able to stop the scroll on those particular platforms. Almost never is someone on LinkedIn because they're just scrolling because there's downtime and they're looking, like I don't know about you, but when I can't sleep at night in the middle of the night or I can't fall asleep right away, I pull out my phone and scroll. Never has there ever been a world where I've pulled out LinkedIn just to
Right.
scroll because of my downtime. So you may come across as not very credible or really with it at all if you're being too entertaining on LinkedIn, but you also can't be so boring that nobody wants to watch it. And I personally think that shorter is always better because while there might be a group of people that is willing to consume long form content or they have the time to, everybody has time for something that's short. And so, in the event that someone is consuming your content that doesn't have a lot of time, you better tell me what it is that I need to know quickly. And one of the things that I have actually conditioned myself, if you will, to do is that, like, if I, going back to tools, there's so many different tools that do the same thing that I'll go to YouTube to try to get like a quick review or rundown of what the tool is. If I look down in the lower right hand corner and I see that that demo is more than like 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, I almost have already decided I don't care if it's a good tool because I don't want to watch when I'm like, see that the demo is 17 minutes long, I'm like, you can't show me at a high level how this tool works in less than 17 minutes. Like, you got two. That's all your girl gonna give you is 2 minutes. Give me that content. Tell me what it does. Tell me why that matters. I like to see things like, because if you're on Canva, every time you move something around, you got to move everything around. Like, I needed to hear why it's important, but I needed to be quick.
Thank you. We've got about 6 minutes left. Any questions that you have that I can answer before I ask you the last one or two questions?
I've done hundreds of these and I've never had the host ask me to ask questions. So I'm glad that you asked me to ask questions. As a founder and as someone who is that has a tech startup, prior to the conversation that you either had with the other guest or prior to the conversation that you've had with me today, would you have thought it was worth prioritizing that you and at least your core leadership team that you should recognize that did you let me ask it this way, did you recognize prior to this conversation that it is important for you to think about how you and your core leadership team is engaging when they have to represent the company externally, or did you think that strong product and right team is enough and I'm going to have this girl on here because somebody might care, but I don't think it's a priority?
Great question. Till I launched the company about 5 years ago, all that I thought about was engineering, purely,
Mm,
100%. And there's enough challenges to go live that I could not even afford the luxury. Outside of ignorance, Shayna, I didn't even have the luxury, even if I were not ignorant, to not know the importance of everything else. I still think I wouldn't have had the luxury, but I would have definitely prepared myself to be better, right? I would have sliced and diced my day differently. But I was ignorant and I didn't have the luxury. So all of the energy was spent in building software.
Yeah.
Even after we came closer to going live, more because you have to do firefighting all the time as a startup to make sure things are working fine. I run into Apple bugs and Slack bugs all the time, but they are big companies, so people are more patient. It's kind of weird, but even large companies, you would think people are less patient, but no, they're more forgiving when they run into a bug on their iPhone, but they're less forgiving when they run into a bug in your product as a small company. So we take a lot of pain in making sure we have the least number of bugs that we can possibly have. So all the energy was spent there. As I started doing the podcast and collaborating with other people, the initial podcasts were again engineering podcasts. We would do some recording about development, software related stuff, publish it because we want to share our learnings with the community. Till someone hit me up and said, "Hey, do you want to collaborate?" And I didn't recognize how much I would enjoy doing that. We started doing that. A lot of the learnings related to communication, sales, marketing has predominantly happened as part of these podcasts that I've collaborated with other people such as yourself, which
Yeah.
is the one reason, as much time as it takes to coordinate, schedule, record, edit, publish, distribute, and do the whole gamut of things, we are doing a lot of this, Sheena, by not coding in the time that we could be doing this very thing. That if that doesn't tell people how much importance we are giving to something like this, I don't know what will. Because the
Yeah.
previous me of 5 years ago would have taken every minute to build more software to have more features. Now we've actually going easy on the features to doing things like this because
Yeah.
we've recognized the importance of it, right? Hopefully, I
Yeah.
mean, I try to answer the question, but does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Absolutely. And then the other question that I would have is because of more, I'm in a little bit of a debate with my mentor. So a lot of B2B outreach sales process, if you will, happens on LinkedIn because, again, that's where people are. They're not on there to be entertained. Now that you recognize that this level of work is something that founders should take seriously, if I was to DM you on LinkedIn, now that you have a better understanding of what it is that I help companies do, what would you need to hear from me in the DM that you would be willing to have a conversation with me? I hope the answer you give is the answer that I gave.
It's actually a brilliant question. I want to answer that as well as I can. I know. Do you have a few more minutes then? We have
I
come to
do.
the top of your hour. Do you have
I
another
have
10 minutes or so?
I've got
Okay.
about 10 minutes, yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I'll remember that because I want to ask you one other thing before we end this, and you can ask me more questions. Please feel free to do that. It's a very important question, and it's not an easy question. I, as somebody who likes LinkedIn, generally like their features, most of them, a lot of them, not all of them. I sometimes spend too much time on it, and I cannot, for whatever reason, come up with an even balance of how much time to spend on that platform, for instance. So there are times I overspend my time there after I finish my work that I make up for it by not even being on it for a long period of time.
Or
So
maybe
it's
it's
kind of,
email. Maybe it's not LinkedIn.
oh,
Maybe
no,
it's
no, I
email.
think no, your question is still valid, but I'm just trying to answer this the more generically and specifically as well. I say this because part of our challenge, Shayna, or my challenge, and I know other people, is figuring out how to slice and dice your week or the month so you spend enough time for each of these activities that is just as important as the other. But that's easier said than done because sometimes you're there, you have fun, you spend more time, and then you're like, oh my God, I have 16 other things that actually are not getting done. And then you completely forget about it. So the consistency of posting, people tell me, Krish, do it on a Monday morning at, I don't know, 11 o'clock as an example. There is no way in the world we're going to have to make that happen because it just does not happen for whatever reason. The
Yeah.
reason I say that is when somebody reaches out to me, say on LinkedIn or through one other means, here are the few things I look for. And the reason I gave you that context was I thought it was a little relevant. See, we get the email. A lot of us get a lot of emails. And these email servers these days, Shana, they do a terrible job. They send everything to other or the junk folder that you don't even get the emails that you actually should be getting. And people don't get the
Right.
emails you want to send. So
Right.
problem number one is ensuring that people actually receive what you sent. Using one of the sales automation platforms has been a terrible idea. We've checked out a number of them, and 90% of the emails end in spam. It doesn't help the domain, the reputation of the email domains and whatnot. So we
Yeah.
backed out of that. So now we actually were very careful about who we send it to. And we send it to very few people when we are prospecting for our B2B APIs and whatnot. Even when you do that, they still end up in the other folder. Even when you're paying for LinkedIn, for those very in mails, I've heard that they actually sometimes push it to the other folder, which defeats the whole purpose. Why am I
Right.
paying so much money to you if you can't even put that in the inbox of the person I'm sending it to? You're not
Right.
doing justice to the payments that I'm making to you. But what can we do, right? We are at the mercy of these tools as poorly as they might sometimes work. Now, let's say people do get the email. There are a few things that you look for, and we try to reciprocate the love by doing the same thing. We're not doing a mass distribution to a lot of people. If I get any email that does not address me by name, I'm
Mhm.
not reading it. But now the sales automation platforms have made it much easier. So you could send 1,000 emails a day and it can say, hey, Shayna, and hey, Krish. So that's
Yeah.
not good enough. When you read through the content of the reach out, Shayna, I think it's easy to tell whether you wrote the 6 lines or whether ChatGPT or Claude helped you write those 6 lines. Now,
Yeah.
it's great to use these AI tools because you should be using them. All of us should be using them. But there is a fine line, and I don't know if people recognize what that line is. If you cross that line and over rely on these tools, then I'm reading a bunch of emails all generated by ChatGPT. I can
And they
tell. I
all
mean, I'm
sound
sure
the
you can.
same.
Yeah, they sound the same. They just have a few differences here and there. It's 3 paragraphs and whatnot. So I think people are going to have to become consciously and intentionally less lazy and find productivity in using these tools. So each of those reach outs seems very specific, right? Hey, you know what? Yep, this person looked at what Snowpal did. They've kind of understand the product offering. And by virtue of doing that, they suddenly now immediately become different from 95% of the other people who never bothered to read about the company, who get on the call and then ask me, Krish, are you a consulting company or a product company? I was like, wow, if you did go to our website and spend 30 seconds on that first page, you could have told at the very minimum whether this company is building a product or not. And that you mentioned credibility more than once, and I think it's extremely important in the world we live in. You can choose to not have credibility, which I don't think is a great idea ever, but maybe when you're really wealthy or powerful. But for the rest of us, I think credibility has to be at the top of that list, is just my 2 cents.
Yeah. So more specifically, I'm not going to tell you which one is my approach versus what is the mentor's approach, but one of the two of us thinks that the approach should be very direct and say, oftentimes founders and technical leaders are not good when they have to communicate with investors, the media, and customers. And if I could help you guys do better at that, would it be worth a conversation? The other of the two of us thinks that the approach should be more general of the big goal that most startups have. Like, if I could help you bring on more high value investors and convert more users, would it be worth a conversation? Based on if you felt like you should get on a call with someone that does what I do and you hadn't given any thought to this is something your team needs, which of those approaches would get you to say, yeah, we probably do need to talk to her about that?
I think being very direct is helpful because we know we can cut through the initial fluff of things and get to the core of the problem. Because with all the tools that are available to all parties today, Shayna, I think each party can be better prepared, right? An engineer can be better prepared with what they have to know outside of engineering. And the person who's not an engineer can be better prepared with what the engineering team does. Because you look at the repo or the code base, or to whatever extent you can, you now have a good synopsis and idea about what this company is doing. If that is an engineering founder, if you end up speaking a little more engineering language, it starts resonating with them. So on one side, people want to automate the heck out of things and genericize the way they reach out to people, and they believe that that's going to scale. Maybe it does, but on the other side, maybe you don't need 1,000 people paying you $1 a piece. Maybe you need one person paying you $1,000. So you want to sort of draw that balance there. I think we all want to save money, but as a startup that's actually very careful about our spend, we recognize that there are areas that we have to increase our spend and the areas that we probably don't have to and can go easy on it. And it's education as well. I think if somebody educates me, I'm more respectful to that person, because they actually now have made me smarter, better than I was before. Right? You know what I mean? So it's people have to treat every individual as though they were the only person that they were working with. And that itself is a good entry point. It's easier said than done, but that's what we try to do. We try to be careful about, before we send that one email, we think about it for 30 minutes, and then finally my wife has to come and say, can you hit that stupid send button, let it just go to the world, right? So I don't know, does that answer your question?
It doesn't. I'm glad you answered it that way because that's what was my vote. Because what I say is that if I come to you very broadly and say, if I could help you bring on more high value investors, then you're probably going to think that I'm either going to introduce you to investors or something like that. And then if I have to come back and say, well, what I'm really talking about is, then I feel that just feels disingenuous and feels like bait and switch. And it doesn't help me cut to whether or not you really have an interest in what it is that I'm doing. Versus if I say to you the other approach, which I think is a lot more direct, and said to you, like, listen, as a founder, you're going to find, you and your team are going to find yourselves in positions where you're going to have to be able to communicate with these three different types of people. And quite frankly, that's not what y'all are usually best at. You know what I mean? Like, then you can clearly, you can be a clean yes or a clean no, whether or not you want to have that conversation, versus me then having to come back and say, well, what it is that I really mean is not that. What I really mean is this, and this is why that's important. And then I just think that more people than not are probably going to feel like bait and switch, and now my credibility has been shot because I looped you in thinking that I'm going to help get you investors. Well, what I'm really going to do is help you learn how to communicate better externally.
Makes sense, right? Thank you. That brings me to my
Thank
last
you for
question, and then
siding with me, Krish. I knew I liked you.
yeah, thank you. And then my last question, and then you can have the closing comments. And please stay on the call for a minute after we stop recording here.
Okay.
My last question for you, Shayna, is you're going out to dinner. It's Friday evening. You can pick the place you want to go to. Money is no object. What would be your order? It can be three different cuisines, but if you can give me one dish for your order of the appetizer, an entree, and a dessert, what would that be?
My appetizer is going to be spinach dip. My entree, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to be a steak cooked medium. And I don't care about dessert, but I am going to have some red wine.
Thank you. That's simple enough that we will understand it. Thank you so much, Shayna. I'll give a one quick reintro to you, and then you can have the closing comments. Again, folks, this conversation was with Shayna Davis. Shayna is the CEO and founder at Executive Signals Group. We'll include the link to Shayna's LinkedIn profile so people can definitely reach out to you, Shayna. Thanks for taking the time and sharing your learnings and experience with us. Much appreciated. That being said, what are your closing comments for our audience?
Yeah, my closing comment is don't be like the person that waits until they get punched in the face to create a plan. Actually, prioritize having an external communication plan so that you can make sure that the narrative that is being created about your company is one that you actually feel good about.
Thank
And
you very
call me if
much.
you need help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shayna.
Thank
With
you,
that,
Chris.
we'll call it wraps here.